is it about quilting that has you so kind of hooked to it over kind of a 10-year period then? What's special about quilting?
I kind of always have been quite creative. So when I was 13, I picked up my first cross stitch. And then after about 18 years of cross stitching, I kind of wanted something different. And I thought, I'll buy a sewing machine. And like everything, you have good intentions. And it sat there and it sat there. And I thought, actually, let's just try something. And I don't know how kind of quilting came into my mind, if I'm honest, because I always remember the first time, it's just like trying to find the right book to kind of teach myself. And I picked up this one, this encyclopedia, and it's very wordy, it's not got any pictures, and it's really difficult. It was really difficult to follow along with the instructions. So I kind of like, right, well, that's no good. And I went to an online class. No, it wasn't an online class. It was a class in my local quilt shop, about half an hour away. And it was a little bit too advanced for me, if I'm honest. It was very embarrassing. I couldn't thread a bobbin, which is the little piece that goes in the bottom of the sewing machine. I had like 3 women kind of looking around my sewing machine going, well, where does this go? So I actually found a part work called The Art of Quilting. And one of the ladies that I worked with had actually started quilting, and she was like, oh, you don't want to start a part work? Oh, that's really, really expensive. And it was, but you'll see the finished product a little bit later on, which I hope you'll think it was worth the money. But when they took you through doing the different blocks, there were nice pictures and examples through each stage. So that kind of got me into doing the quilting. And then because it was a part work, you had to make 90 blocks. I went, oh, I want to actually see something finished. And I actually finished the quilt there. So that's a baby quilt. And it's just very simply a piece of fabric with fabric kind of attached around the outside and a little bit of quilting. So that's kind of where it got me started, and I just carried on and developed and just started to grow and enhance my techniques. So that's kind of where it all started, Nick.
And are you, from that point of that initial kind of lesson or that workshop, are you self-taught from that point in, and then obviously and referring to sort of books and things like that, or how's that progress for you?
So there is I've got lots of books. I won't show you that. I'm a librarian, so there's lots and lots of books, if I'm honest. But YouTube, there are some fantastic YouTube people who do stuff. So there's a Missouri Star Quilt Company, and they do about 20 minutes. They take you through all the techniques, what you've got to buy, because there's different types of fabric bundles that you can buy. And it just takes you through very basic, and they show you kind of what you need to do. So it is kind of self-taught. And then I've kind of gone on specific quilting courses. And then last year I actually ran, so I'm a member of my local quilting group. I have to say I'm one of the youngest there. And I ran a course for them, which they all enjoyed, and everybody got created different things from something which is a really, really simple technique. But I'll explain that when I start showing the photos, because the 2 that I made there are great examples. But I just wanted to, if that's okay, is to tell you what quilting is actually all about if you know nothing about quilting.
Well, I know very little. I know very little other than my wife disappears occasionally and takes my credit card. So could you tell us a little bit more? Is it an expensive hobby? It
can be, but please don't let that put you off. So I'll just show you. So this is a bit Blue Petery. So this quilt behind me is something called an apple core. So you can see just that shape is an apple core. And this is actually made out of my husband's old work shirts. I can't take any any kind of, so I've got pictures of my husband when I started laying it out on the floor. It was just like, Nikki, that doesn't look right, here, get out the way. And so he designed the layout of this quilt, and I must admit he's not overly fond of it. And if COVID hadn't have happened, there are some big international, there's a big international quilt exhibition in Birmingham in August. And one of their topics was recycle and reuse. So I was actually going to submit this as a kind of reused, and we were kind of coming up with different names for the quilt, but it's kind of, the fabric, it's not the best, you know, it's literally just old cotton shirts, and it doesn't matter. You know, it was my first practice with curves, so some of it's not great, but it, you know, I was recycling what I had. And then, so quilting.
Yeah.
So hold on, let me just find a couple of things. So what you normally have is you normally have a top. There are 3 layers to a quilt. So you've got the top piece, then you've got the wadding, which comes in various bits and sizes, and then you have the backing. So there are 3 layers. And quilting is actually the name of the technique you use to sew it all together. So this little tiny sheep quilt, if you look on the back, so all on that, that's what the quilting, that's quilting. So it's not the different types of styles that you can put on the block. Quilting is the sandwiching and then the sewing of all 3 layers.
So quilting is the process of
Yes,
that.
it's
Okay.
the process.
Okay.
So that's that, and then that comes in very different shapes and formats. So that's that. Over there.
Wonderful. So with quilting, and we just had that example of your husband's shirts. There's an element of personalisation then, and almost, I guess, almost archiving a little bit of sort of family history and elements like that. And you see, don't you, sometimes the quilt that's made from patches that kind of represent a history of a family and such like that. How interesting, exciting is that customization that can go into quilting?
Well, that you normally just get a design. So another example is this one behind me. And it is just actually 2 blocks. I don't know how well you can see it. You might be able to see it better on the picture, but I'll explain that. So it's literally just 2 blocks. There's a big triangle here, and then there's a smaller triangle here, and a smaller triangle here. So that's 1 block, and then this block is the 2 smaller triangles sewn together and sewn again, and then making the big block. Now this is literally from my scraps. Rather embarrassingly, I have a lot of scraps. And so I kind of set myself a little target this year to not buy any fabric, because you can't see the boxes of fabric behind me. So you can, so that quilt, I had a couple of piles around the sewing table, and I literally was pulling them all random together and putting them together. It was only when I laid them out on the bed and sent a few pictures to my friend, she was just like, oh no, that yellow needs to balance out. So just watch what you're doing with the yellows, but everything else is completely random. I must admit, when I started doing it, I was like, oh, I don't know if I like this, but it's actually probably now one of my favourite quilts, because each of, just like you were saying about a little bit of fabric, each one of the fabric, I know when I bought it, what I used it for, and there's expensive fabric in there, there's dirt cheap fabric in there, but it really is a nice mishmash of fabric.
How quickly do you fill a room? Because clearly you've got a room dedicated there where you're sat in. Is that something that's accumulated over those 10 years, or do you very quickly mount up the spare fabrics and such?
Yes, you do. So there's a little thing in quilters. You kind of have the fabric that you use, the fabric you bought and thought, what was I thinking? And the fabric that is too nice to cut. So they kind of just go in piles. But because I have so much, and so my husband's just like, all your quilting stuff stays in that room. There is some in the garage. I have secretly put some in the garage. But predominantly it's in here. And there was an occasion, so the reason why it kind of spurred me to kind of start using up my fabrics, in the quilting group, or one of my friends in the quilting group, one of the other quilters sadly passed away, and they came in and filled a stage with all of her fabric, and everyone just kind of went, oh yeah, we've all got a lot at home, haven't we? Oh, we've got to start using it up. And my friend actually gave me a huge bag just full of soft furnishing fabrics that I've not really played with, so I've got a big kind of piece of that. So it's all quite random, and you can get, so there are kits that you can buy that's got everything in there. So I started with a baby quilt, and it was literally all there, and you just followed the instructions and it all came up. I think when you first start, you kind of see some of these quilts and go, oh my gosh, that's amazing, how do they do it? But you kind of got to go, well, this is mine, it's going to be my interpretation. I think, as we were mentioning earlier on, no quilt is ever perfect. And I get sometimes like, oh no, that's wrong, unpick. But actually, you know, I kind of say to myself, this is not an exhibition quilt, this is for me, and I'm just going to use it. So there's different ways to do it. But can I just show you kind of, if anyone's interested in what basic materials you need, because you don't actually need an awful lot. So what I would suggest is you start off with, this really is my blue Peter moment, a good cutting mat. This is the small one. I've got a big one down the side of my desk. Some really good quilting rulers. So this one is a 6.5. And then I've got a much 23-inch ruler, which is 5.5. Rotary cutter, which is always useful. And when you're quilting, 505 spray, because that you can glue all of your layers down. I've got some with pins in, and I look like a pin cushion by the end of the time I've been sewing, because you scrape your hands. And the most important piece of kit, an unpicker.
Okay.
So when you go wrong, you're there, and it's just like, there's a little saying that's just like, do not come near me when I've got this in my hand, because something's gone wrong, and you're just unpicking. So that's it. So that's that. So I don't know how you're doing for time, but so there's a couple of pictures.
We're going to bring some pictures up, and we've actually got some early questions that have come in, which I'll go through now as well. So perhaps we could bring the pictures up, David, and I'll go through the questions. So first question is, where do you get your inspiration from for some of your designs? Oh, that's beautiful.
So the inspiration, so this particular quilt, there was an online platform called Craftsy, which is then merged into Blueprint, and unfortunately they folded because of COVID, and they just did online videos. So this quilt was actually, I picked up the fabric because it was just too beautiful to not have, and it came in 5-inch a charm pack. So different sizes are called different things, and what they do is companies bring out so a charm pack has fabrics that will all blend together no matter what you're doing. So these were all kind of brought in, and it started in the corner, and then you sewed, and then it gradually got bigger and bigger as you sewed all the pieces together. And so that was that. So the inspiration from that one came on a so what I'll do is, actually, as I'm going through, I'll talk where the inspiration for the quilt came from, and then I'll cover that one.
Yeah, lovely.
Next question.
Should we move on to the next? Okay. So quick question here is, what's the difference between quilting and patchwork?
Oh, now I don't know, because I've literally got a book, a magazine here in front of me, which is called Patchwork and Quilting. Now I don't know if I think that's something I'm going to have to come back to. I'm going to find out, and then I will email you, Nick, and then you can tell the group next week if that's okay. Because I would just be plucking it out. Yeah, I'm not quite sure, but I will find out.
We've got lots of questions, but if we go through the images and then we can explain some of the work we're looking at, and then I'll ask a few more questions at the end.
Yeah. So these were 2.5-inch squares that came in a pack, which I really liked, and I thought, I don't know really what to do with. I'm not quite sure. I think it was an online course that they saw on this, and all it started out with was I sewed in rows. I think it might have been 8 by 8, and then put the rows together. And then, David, could you just zoom in for a little bit, please? That's great. So what I did was literally cut it. I cut it on the diagonal and then moved the pieces around and re-sewed them. So some of them, so you'll see the join in the middle with the pink and the other way, sorry, David. So the 2 pinks at the end with the green, they should all match, and some of them match, some of them don't. But it was literally just a square cut on the diagonal. And then if you could zoom out again, please, David. And then it was just all sewn, so you got that kind of centerpiece, which is in a slightly different alteration to the middle piece. The best thing about that quilt is my mitered corners are beautiful. I have never been able to recreate how wonderful the binding is. So the binding on the edges are just superbly beautiful, and I have no idea what I was on that day, but I wish I could find the skill again to do that. I never can quite get my corners quite right. So, but literally, you just sewed all the squares together and cut them. So that was quite a nice, a nice one to do, and it looks really effective because of the way it was cut and just sewn back together. So, so yes.
So here's a question that's come in, which relates slightly to that. Is and Sharon asks, from my experience of making quilts, it takes a long time. You need to enjoy the process as much as the final product. How long does it take you to finish a quilt? So how long did it take for that last example?
I think that probably took me a couple of evenings or a weekend. It wasn't very long. Okay. And I tend to get very absorbed in it, and I quite like seeing the finished product. And so I'm looking at it now thinking, how long did that take me? I don't think it didn't take me that long, because it was literally just sewing it together, cutting it, and then playing with the binding and quilting it. So I would say that's probably a weekend.
Well, looking at it, I would have thought you would have said a month or two, but then,
oh no,
you know.
No, that one wasn't a month or two. No, that's a nice, quite quick one to have done. This is one of the latest ones that I finished. This one took me a Saturday. No, it didn't. It took me a Friday night and a Saturday, and then a Sunday. So the Saturday night, I cut all of the fabric pieces out. The Friday night, Saturday, I sewed it, because if you look at the back, David, could you zoom in, please? So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces to this, and the light blue at the bottom and the stripe and the dark blue, that's just 3 pieces sewn together, and the circle is got some interweave or bondaweb on it, and cut that out, and then we put that on there, and then I've just put it on there, and I had to measure where the circle was. I had a big huge debate with the design, because I actually only had enough fabric for the stripes to be going up and down, whereas the one on the side was going across. And my husband just has one job when I'm quilting. No matter what it is, I go downstairs, I show it to him, and he goes, "Ooh, that's pretty." That's it. That's all he needs to do. But we've got away with that now because I just put it on Instagram. So he just goes, "Ooh, that's nice." And so he doesn't even have to look up.
Wow.
And then the quilting did take some time because the lines are an inch across for all of those. So that's the first time I've used cross hatching in my quilts. And I quite like the process. So I was on the floor with a tailor's chalk and the rulers, just drawing lines with that one, and it is quite effective. My biggest problem is showing the quilts to my mother, and my mother goes, "Oh, I like that. What are you going to do with that?" And I'm just like, "No, it's mine."
So where do your quilts end up then? On, you know, do you hold on to most of them, or do you gift them away as well?
There's quite a poignant story that I'll share. So my uncle not so long ago had bone cancer, and he was getting cold, and my aunt said, "Oh, can you make him a quilt?" And so I made him a quilt, and he loved it. It never left his side all the way through his illness. When he passed away, my aunt was just like, "What do we do with this quilt?" And there was a big family debate. It's kind of like, well, nobody wanted it, obviously, and I didn't want it going anywhere else. So it was actually cremated with him, which I find is really nice now. But the family joke is, don't get Nikki to make you a quilt, because it's tainted. It's kind of nice when people enjoy them. So my uncle's got one. My sister doesn't want one at all. My mum's got one. My mum's got two. It's kind of like, if you get a quilt from me, it's kind of special, I say, because the amount of hours that it goes into it is, I give quilts that I know are going to be appreciated because they know the time that's gone into them. Right. So I was saying earlier on about I taught a class. So I didn't teach class. I taught a technique because of copyright purposes. I didn't teach a class. I just showed the technique of different things. So it was, we created this. It's based on a very traditional Dresden pattern, which is just sewing things in a circle. And then you create the little houses and the roofs and all of that. And I think, David, if you could focus in. So in the middle, we've got like a little skyscraper. Now, for those eagle-eyed among you, you might just spot a little piece of green. What I had wanted to have was a little green circle in the middle to kind of represent a green space in a town or a city. Only it went slightly wrong. So I basically covered it up. And actually, this looks really effective. Because it's raised up, because it's already got a piece of fabric on it, and then it's got another piece of fabric glued on. So that's that one. And if you flick to the next picture, please, David. This is exactly the same pattern, but with a completely different, more contemporary feel to it. And the quilting around the edge where you see all the stitches, that's, I think it's stapling. No, is it stapling? No, I can't remember the correct term, but it's literally, I went round with a walking foot and just went round the outside. And so that was that one. The next one is a completely different style of quilting. So it's something called Sashko. So if you could zoom in, that's it. Thank you, David. So this is a Japanese technique, and it is very simply a running stitch. So it looks amazing, but there is a cheat to it. On the fabric are all of your dashes of where you've got to sew. So that's how you get these really nice lines. Some of them are it does look really, really effective. And what you actually do is they call it, you load the needle. So you put all the needles on the same, you push your needle through the fabric and then pull it and then it gives that really nice effect. And then you wash it, and the kind of markings all disappear, and then you can just add the I just add it as a large table runner, but you can imagine I could have cut this up and made little table mats, but I just think it just looks really effective. And if I'm stressed, that is one of the most relaxing stitches to do. It's a very simple stitch to kind of move on. So
it's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Di, I kind of dominated the conversation. Did you have any questions for Nikki?
Well, my one, what do you use them for, and do you give them as gifts? And that was answered beautifully, wasn't it, by Nikki's response about her uncle, which was lovely. And Esther's commented that that was a beautiful gift, full of love to give anyone, and very special that it went with him. That was just lovely. And there's lots of comments about the amount of work that's gone into them and how stunning they are. For me, there was a photograph that you shared as well with the foxgloves that we saw initially. And that looked like a really different technique, or is that my imagination?
No, so this is a foxglove one, and this is basically a piece of fabric with the pattern on. And David, could you zoom in, please? And all I did, Di, was literally quilt around the outside. So all of the little the circles I've gone round in black. All of the lines I've gone down just to emphasize it, and I've emphasized the green stem as well. And that's all I did with that, and that just looks really, really effective.
And is there another name for that technique then? Because it seems there's a wide variety.
It's called free motion quilting.
Right.
So you have to buy a special foot for your machine, and you drop the feed dogs, and you have to be really relaxed. You cannot do it while you're tense. And then it's almost like you paint or you draw with your needle.
I was going to say, it's like drawing, isn't it, really? Yeah. And can we just go back to that beautiful big quilt that you've got on the bed? That was that one, David, because I think we've skipped over that, and I really don't want to skip over it because it's just exquisite.
So I was saying about the part work that I bought. This was the result of the part work.
Wow.
So there's so many different techniques in there about different ways of matching seams, how you put together. And this one actually took me 6 years to finish. But it's finished. So yeah, yay.
So is every bed in your house covered with one of these beautiful works of art or not?
So my husband's got, so on the spare bed, we've got one that I picked up at an auction, because it was 50 quid, and it's just like, oh my god, you couldn't buy the fabric for that, let alone the thing, and I just had to rescue it. So that one was so the part work. David, could you go back to the part work, the previous one? So the white that goes around the borders, that was all machine stitched, and then each block was hand stitched. So we were saying I don't do an awful lot of hand stitching, but because I couldn't manage that big one on my small machine, I just did that hand stitched. And then the next one, the very colourful gravity quilt, if you go on to the next one, please, David. Thank you for everybody's comments, that's really sweet. So this one was something called a block of the month quilt. So you bought it, and you had a piece every month delivered, and then you could work on it. So it got me to use different techniques. David, could you zoom in on it, please? So whereas previously I hand sewed and I quilted it, This one was sent out to a long arm quilter.
Gosh.
So that's where they put all of the fabric all on a big machine, and they kind of just do all the swirls and everything else. And I did that because I couldn't make it. I couldn't have done that.
Okay. Equipment, I guess.
It was just, yeah, you need the right equipment for that one. And as a cross stitcher, I kind of, you pay for the framing. And so for this one, I just equated it to, you know, this is the icing on the cake, because otherwise it would have just sat on the side, not being quilted. When I got this quilted, I was working with a colleague, and apparently I could have gone and seen Liverpool at home for 6 games, the amount of money this cost me, but it was worth it. What I would love to have done is to actually have it as a wall hanging, because now that bed there with my husband's lovely feet, that's a king size, that's a king size bed. So, and the outside, you can just about see it overlaps. It is massive, and it's really nice and warm, and it's just lovely. I learned so much from that. There is a mistake on it.
They're meant to be on every quilt though, yeah.
There is. So it's